Council. Can we start with roll, please?
Ms. Connolly? Here. Ms. Downs?
Here.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott? Here. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Ms. Underhill? Here. And Mayor Hardy?
Here. And we have a motion for electronic participation from Ms. Flynn.
Yes. Ms. Flynn, could you please identify your remote location and reason for participation by electronic means?
Yes, thank you. I'm in Falls Church and participating remotely for health-related caregiving responsibilities that preclude my physical attendance. Thanks.
Thank you. I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Erin Flynn in this meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's adopted policy.
We have a second.
Second.
Downs on the second. Call roll, please, clerk.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's begin with our Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Do we have a motion to amend and adopt the meeting agenda? I know that there's a...
Madam Mayor, may I move to adopt the agenda with one change, and that is on E, other business. If we could swap the work session items A and B so that our police chief could and Director of Human Services could address their issue first.
We have a second?
Second.
It's Underhill in the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Meeting agenda is adopted. Let's move down the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone in the audience taking oaths of office tonight?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, let's move on to public comment. We start with a summary of written comments, please.
Susan P. Hamilton of 309 Grove Avenue said she opposed giving taxpayer funds to the Falls Church News Press. Kevin Coleman, 1022 Poplar Drive in Falls Church, Fairfax County, asked the city to install speed bumps on West Street between Poplar Drive and Kennedy Street. Dave Gustafson, 302 West Columbia Street, wrote in support of amending the city's comprehensive plan to include the updated bicycle master plan. John M. Murdoch, Vice Chair of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation Board, wrote to notify council that the Tinner Hill Music Festival would take a hiatus in 2025 to allow the foundation to focus on developing and enhancing the historical profile of the Tinner Hill District. And he thanked the Council, Recreation and Parks Department, Police Department, and others for supporting the festival over the years. Alex Ramey, former city resident, said they visited the city recently after moving out of the country a few months ago and provided compliments on improvements to the city's pedestrian and bicycle safety and public art and pocket parks that were added since they moved. Paul Rothstein submitted complaints about pedestrian accessibility around the Birch and Broad Shopping Center and the West Falls project. Allison Green, 119 Lounsbury Place, urged council not to raise taxes, and Ari Auteur wrote with suggestions for improving safety for cyclists in the city. She also supported adding more pocket parks along Broad Street.
Great, thank you. And how about receipt of public comment? Do we have anyone in person or virtual?
I haven't received any speaker slips. We had one commenter sign up for electronic comment, but I'm not sure if they have joined the meeting or not. That would be Paul Rothstein.
Mr. Rothstein, are you with us?
Is Mr. Rothstein there?
I don't see him on the Teams meeting.
So I think that's all we have.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, let's move on to the report of the Retirement Board. Welcome, Ms. Rydberg.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for inviting me on behalf of the Retirement Board to provide my annual report. My name is Connie Rydberg and I am the chair of the Retirement Board. I know some of you have seen me multiple times giving my annual report, but for those of you who are new, just let me give you a little bit of background on myself and a summary of the retirement plans that the Retirement Board oversees. So for the last 30-plus years, my day job has been as a pension actuary. I oversee pension plans sponsored by large corporations and not-for-profits, so slightly different from the plans that the city sponsors. Different rules apply, but a lot of the same concepts apply. So I am able to take the things that I learned sort of during my day job and thankfully apply them to the work that I do at the Retirement Board. So the Retirement Board oversees 7 plans. There are 2 pension plans. There's the basic plan that covers government employees and school employees who are not eligible for the Virginia State Retirement Plan. And we have the police pension plan, which covers our police force. We have 3 what's called OPEB plans, other post-employment benefit plans, and that is retiree health and retiree life insurance. So those are 3 plans. One covers government employees, one covers school employees, and one covers the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Academy. In this report, you'll see them just reported all together as one OPEB plan. And then the Retirement Board oversees 2 savings plans, kind of like the 401k plans that cover private corporations. For the city, we refer to them by their IRS code section, so 457B plan, which has employee salary deferrals, and then the 401A plan, which is the city's match on those salary deferrals. And in total, so the Retirement Board oversees about $230 million of retirement investments on behalf of the city. So my report today has 2 sections. One is a lot of numbers, a financial section, and I'll go through that in some detail. And then there's a written summary of our work plan activities, and I'll just highlight a few of those before turning it over for questions. So starting in line 11, this summarizes the assets for the 2 pension plans, the basic and the police, and separately then for the OPEB plan. So the 2 pension plans, the basic and the police plan, you can see the asset values here, about $135 million for the basic and $45 for the police. These plans have the same investment strategy and are invested together. So it's a mix of active and passive investments, and it's in stocks, bonds, real estate, and infrastructure. And the return for FY24 was about 12.5 for those plans. And then we have the OPEB plan, much smaller at $21 million, that has a separate investment strategy. Because of its size, it's all in passive and limited really to equities and bonds. And the return there was 14.8%. Higher than the pension plans really helped because they weren't in the real estate and infrastructure that the pension plans have. Those 2 asset classes, real estate and infrastructure, generally help in the long term, but not in the specific FY24. The 3 plans over a 7-year period have pretty much the same annual return of about, average annual return of 8.8 to 8.7%. We look at the plans, these are long-term commitments to the employees and former employees. So we tend to look at longer-term investment results. That compares to our long-term assumption of 6.5%, so we're in good shape there. And then we do rank and compare ourselves to other investment and other plans. So for the pension plans, we look at other pension plans that have similar investment strategies. And there we're ranking in the top 30%. For the OPEB plan, we rank ourselves against other OPEB plans, and there we're in the top decile. So those are the market values at the end of June 30th of 2024. We've also included, starting in line 17, the asset values after 6 months of FY 2025. The returns there are 5.2 to 5.4% in excess of our long-term assumptions, so that is good news there. All right, turning to the page and onto the next page. Line 28, now we're switching into the actuarial results. So every year we ask our actuary to do what we call like a snapshot look at the assets of the plan versus the liability. And the liability here meaning what's the value of the promise we've made to our employees and former employees, and compare those two. And in this case, we use smooth value of assets, not the market value of assets that you saw in the prior section, because that gives us a better long-term sense of where we are. For the basic and police plan, looking at the last two columns here, the funded status of the plan, meaning comparing the assets to the liabilities, has been pretty steady at about 111% for the basic plan, and the police plan also fairly steady, just changing slightly from 107% to 106%. Then we have the OPEB plan, and the funded status last year was 168%, and that increased to 197% this year. As you can see just from those numbers, the funded status of the OPEB plan is much more volatile than pension plans for a variety of reasons. A big one is just the cost of that plan really heavily depends on the current healthcare costs and where we think future healthcare costs will be and how that outlook changes every year. So we do see more volatility in that number. Okay, switching now down over to line 40, water sale money. So as a refresher, this is money that's in the pension plan. We track it separately. And this came out of a decision back in 2015 when the city sold its water system. The city council made the decision to invest $9.2 million of those proceeds into the pension plan to create basically an endowment. And the city uses the investment earnings from that endowment. It's complicated, but we use those investment earnings to reduce the contribution that would otherwise be required, and those savings are then used for other projects. There's a whole administration manual that goes along with that endowment and how we structure it and how we run it. But a few key things are, when we look at the investment earnings on the endowment, we look at a 5-year average so that we don't have all the market volatility impacting the city. There's also a maximum. The maximum the city can use every year is $825,000. Now the city usually is using $640,000. So there has been more investment earnings allocated to the city's use than has been used. So now we've created a reserve account, and that can be used by the city sort of for a rainy day and to offset pension contributions. All right, so that's the background. Now the numbers. The table in line 41. So the initial balance at July 1, 2015, the principal was $9.2 million. The reserve account was zero, so a total water sale money of $9.2 million. Now, 9 years later, the principal has grown to $9.8 million. The city reserve account stands at $3.1 million, and so for a total of $12.9 million now in water sale money. So the average return over that 9-year period has been 8.3%. So that's 8.3% investment return per year on the water sale money. And so now moving down to row 46, just summarizing what has been the benefit to the city over this past 9 years for that decision. So the increase in the principal is $0.6 million. The reserve account now stands at $3.1 million. During the last 9 years, the city has used $4 million of the investment earnings for other projects, essentially. So over the 9-year period, the total value to the city has been $7.7 million. At this point, I always like to remember the late council member Ira Kalin, because he was the architect of this idea, and his ideas and his persistence, made it happen. I also want to thank the council members who made the difficult decision at that point in time to make that investment and take that leap of faith and put their faith in the retirement board. I might be mistaken, but I think it was Ms. Connolly and Mr. Schneider that were on the city council at that point and made that decision. So I want to thank you. And if I've missed someone, please correct me. But I do appreciate the faith you put in the retirement board, and I'm glad that we could deliver. Moving on. So the retirement board also oversees the defined contribution plan. Again, this is like the 401k in the private world. The plan assets, the participant salary deferrals in the 457B plan is about 31 million. The 401A plan, which is the employer match or the city's match, is just under $1 million. We've listed here the allocation of the investments, of the participants' investments in the 457, well diversified. And then we've also listed the 5-year returns for some of the key asset classes. And again, strong 5-year returns for those plans. So from a bottom line perspective, I mean, these plans are financially steady in a good place. And from the retirement board's perspective, no concerns. All right, now switching gears to the work plan activities. I'm just going to highlight 2 before I turn it over for questions. Going down to line 173, environmental, social, and governance investment research. Further down into that section onto line 182. So the council often asks, what are our retirement plan involvement in fossil fuels? So we took a look at that at the end of December. And our involvement is at about 7%, which is unchanged from where we were the last time we looked at that. You can see in this section, we've listed some of the DOL regulations that we follow, some decisions about how we are implementing those DOL decisions. And then, of course, some caveats, lots of changes in the world, both at the White House and some changes in directives to the Virginia state retirement system. So we will see how that impacts us. But for now, we've outlined here our approach and how that's impacted some of our decisions. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is all the way down towards the end of our membership, which starts in line 293, but I wanted to go over to line 298 and just highlight, we had 2 long service retirement board members, if you will, retire from the retirement board this year for different personal reasons, but Charles Collier and Marshall Jarrett both were very long service, dedicated, very engaged retirement board members, and I just wanted to acknowledge their dedicated service and really appreciate all that they've brought to the retirement board. I'm also very excited. We have a couple of new board members, and they've already been dived in, been very engaged, and very excited to see what ideas that they bring. I guess I should have also acknowledged we have a lot of staff members who are very supportive and very helpful in the work that we do, as well as some outside advisors. So, again, expressing my appreciation to all of them. And with that, I'm going to take a drink of water and open it up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Whitebird. Clearly, I think your professional expertise and just sound management has been a gift to us for 16 years, so I'm so grateful for that. We'll see whether other people have questions or comments as well. Ms. Underhill?
I've had the pleasure to serve as a council liaison to the retirement board, so I've gotten to see you in action this past year. So I don't have too many questions. I do have one, but I did want to also thank you for your dedication and your care. We are just so incredibly lucky to have you on the retirement board. the meetings are well run, and what I really appreciate is the fact that you are willing to explain in human terms all the complicated things that are going on, especially to the employees and residents that are serving on that board that don't have the financial expertise. So it's just a big, big thank you. My only question is about that reserve account. The $800,000, you mentioned that there's a maximum of $800,000 that we can withdraw every year?
825,000, yes.
825,000. And so even though we built up $3 million in there, there's only so much we can take out per year.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Connolly?
So my follow-up to Ms. Underhill's question is, we've only been taking out 650, so we have a little buffer, correct, that we have been reinvesting. Right, but we could take that out at some point and spend it in the current year.
Up to the limit of
Up to 825.
$25,000, yes. That's not a decision of the retirement board.
Right. No, that's a decision of the council, but that's one of those things that's important to know. Thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Snyder?
Just to thank you. Your contribution has been extraordinary, and your expertise is so valued. Do you see any particular storm clouds on the horizon that we ought to think about? I guess the known unknowns that you want to share with us tonight. Anything that we can be supportive of you more so than we already have. Thank you.
Of course, it's always hard to know the unknowns that you don't know, but I think I know we are well served by our consultants. You probably saw in the work plan report, we hired a new outside attorney this year, and very excited to have them on board. They are a top-notch organization, and I'm looking forward to getting their feedback on our plans and ideas. I see going forward, we just have a lot of opportunities in the savings plan. There have been legal changes that the city, we can take advantage of that aren't costs, but could really help our employees, and we'll be looking at those things. Washington, D.C. is always I don't know what the right word is, but
There you have it.
there's lots going on there, and not all the things impact public plans, so we're insulated from some of that. That would be the only thing at this point that I could see being an issue, but I don't anticipate, and I think actually we just have lots of good things that we could be doing, and I'm looking forward to just continuing to make those steps towards better and better.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Vice Mayor?
I have nothing to add other than additional thanks to both the long-term members who've served us so well, and to you for your leadership and for bringing everybody that's new up to speed and getting their insights and new creative input as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just piggybacking on that, I know you and I have talked on the school side of things, but if there's anything, any support you need, just feel free to reach out, because this is as someone who's brand new to the council, this is really impressive to see what you all have done and just what great stewards you are of our retirement fund. So thank you very much. And again, just reach out if there's anything that we can do to better support you or your board. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually just had a follow-up question, maybe for Mr. Shields, following up on Ms. Underhill and Ms. Connolly's question. Does the $3.1 million count towards the city's kind of unassigned fund balance or capital reserves, all the rainy day funds we've got?
It does not. It's wholly within the pension plan, so it's outside of the city's books that are covered in our annual audit.
And even though we don't draw on the full 825, how would our financial advisors look at usage of any of that?
Well, that's
probably a harder question than.
right. Yeah.
I have, so one of the ways that it helps the city, when we calculate the contribution and we look at the funded status that we talked about with the actuaries, they're looking at it one way, but when you report the financials for like bondholders and the auditors, we get to count both that sort of regular plan assets and the water sale money. So while I say here, for example, the pension plan is 111% funded, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I believe it looks better on your financial statement because that 111% doesn't have the water sale money in it. It does, so it helps when the financial environment or providers look at what's the financial status of the city. So they do count it there as a strength of the city.
Yeah, thank you for making that really important observation. So when we're in the markets for debt, that's one of the key indicators of fiscal health that bondholders look at, and ours is very strong because of these actions and because of the great oversight that the Retirement Board provides.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you again. I know that many other municipalities do not have the talent that we have here, and so we are grateful for your stewardship and your expertise that you've shared with us.
Thank you, and I appreciate your support.
Great. Okay, let's move on to report of the city manager then. Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Hardy, members of council. I've got a bunch of things I'll go through, and I'll end with some comments just in terms of things that are happening at the federal government level and their impact on the city. So the rapid fire things, I just want the public to be aware that we're aware of the scaling of the concrete at the WNOD crossings, and our project manager is working with Sagres Construction on a resolution for that, so more to come on that. Tax assessments are being finalized by the city's assessor of real estate, Mr. Irvin Bailey, and they will be mailed out to the public on February 18th, so later this month, and we'll have a press release that will provide all the data that's associated with assessments at that time. Accessory dwellings. So a couple of key dates that are coming up on the consideration of amendments to the city zoning ordinance with respect to the regulation of accessory dwellings in the city of Falls Church. The Planning Commission will hold a work session on February 19th, and then they will follow that with a public hearing and their vote on recommendations to the City Council, which is scheduled for March 5th. The City Council then will have a work session on March 10th to hear the Planning Commission's recommendations, and then what is scheduled on the is April 14th for the Council's final public hearing and final consideration. We do note that the motion, when first reading was given, was for final consideration to be on April 7th, and so we will be asking Council at your meeting on February 24th to make a vote to move that final consideration to April 14th. I also want to note with respect to accessory dwellings that we are putting out a mailer it's currently at the printer, and it provides these dates so that the public can be engaged in the Planning Commission deliberations and the City Council's deliberations. That mailer will be mailed to addresses with R1A and R1B and townhouse or RM zoning. It is a fairly extraordinary public outreach and public notice effort that came out of comments that we received from the public at our town hall meetings and at the library, where people, asked whether they felt like maybe some of their neighbors didn't know that this was being discussed, and so this mailer idea came out of those discussions. We'll also be placing yard signs at key locations across the city for people who might not live in R1A neighborhoods, but that might also, or residential detached neighborhoods, but might still be interested in this policy question. There also is a portal where people can learn about what is under consideration for accessory dwellings and provide comments, and it'll be in a form that's very similar to the page, the form that was handed out at those library town hall meetings back in January. I do want to note that responses in that portal will not be treated as survey responses because they don't, people are sort of self-selecting when they fill these forms out, so it's not a random sample, and it shouldn't be treated as something with statistical significance, but rather the input will be read, it will be recorded, and it will be treated as public input the same way as if people showed up at a public hearing and spoke directly to the council. So that's our intent with that. Moving to a different topic, but still on the topic of surveys, the City Council had approved funding for a community satisfaction survey. We did one 2 years ago. We're working with Probalski again to do a random sample that will have statistical significance in terms of the results. And we anticipate that will be going out with survey contacts to residents of the city in mid-February. So that's coming up soon. For the public, if you do get a call or an email or a text from Probalski Research, we do ask that you do respond. It's not phishing. The City of Falls Church hired this firm to conduct this survey, and the information that's provided will help city officials understand the concerns and opinions of our community and help inform city programs and initiatives going forward. It is by invitation only, so people can't step forward and volunteer for this survey. It is a randomized process, and we do hope for the final results from that in early summer. Moving to the next topic, let me just note the storm, which is coming. We do have winter weather that's on the way. We're expecting about 2 inches tomorrow, and then the heaviest part of the storm will actually be Tuesday night, possibly another 4 inches or so overnight, and into Wednesday. This storm will be different than the January storm in that some warmer temperatures will follow behind this storm. Nonetheless, we do ask that all of our business members clear their sidewalks in front of their businesses by city code. You're required to do that within 6 hours of snow stopping in the city. And similarly, our residents across the city also clear your sidewalks after the snow so people can walk safely throughout the city. Residents have 12 hours after the snow stops. And the last thing I'll note on the storm prep is that we do intend to announce a snow emergency that will be effective at 5 p.m. tomorrow, so that people, when they get home, if they could move their cars off of snow emergency routes, that will help our crews as they clear the streets throughout the night on Tuesday night. I think those are the key things I wanted to report on tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. That's a lot. Thank you. Ms. Connolly?
Mine is just on your very last item, which is the snow and businesses shoveling their sidewalks. I know that there are certain businesses that are always offenders, and is there a way that they can be reached out to tomorrow morning and told that they need to take care of their sidewalks? I'm thinking specifically of the bowling alley, which always plows its entire lot and never does anything to the sidewalks. So if someone could reach out to them specifically, and then there are others as well.
We do have that short list, and we will be in touch with them. Thank you.
I'm glad Ms. Connolly brought that up, so I wouldn't have to. Thank you. Others? Ms. Underhill?
Is there any additional information on the, I can't remember the language you used, but on the crumbling of the WNOD, the scaling?
Yeah.
Is there any more information as to like how that happened or why that happened?
So that's under dispute right now between us and the contractor, so I won't comment on it publicly, but we don't think it's a satisfactory situation, and we do want it resolved. So we'll work with the contractor to produce that outcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks. One more comment. I really appreciate the work that city staff does in snow emergencies, and it's a classic example of all the services that local government provides, even in less than ideal circumstances. So thank you to all employees. I do want to repeat the request that there be some attention made by the plow drivers to avoid piling snow on sidewalks. It's kind of ironic that we plow the streets for cars And in doing so, we actually load up sidewalks that businesses and individuals have actually cleared. So I know it's difficult, and I would just ask for continued thought about the plow drivers to avoid, to the extent possible, piling the snow from the street onto the sidewalks. Thank you.
I would add that crosswalks too, because often when you're trying to get on the ramp, there's a pile of snow at the ramp and you have to like leap over to even get into the crosswalk. So that
Yep.
makes it really tricky.
Exactly.
So it's a comment that's well received, and I know our Superintendent of Operations, Mr. Herb Holmes, is very alert to that situation, and our crews are alert to it. I think more alert now than they have been in the past, and so I want to thank them for that. And it is a job, a lot of them are, sometimes they're at the tail end of a 12-hour shift, and they're just trying to get the job done. And this is, but it is important, and it is on their, they're conscious of that need. So Thank you for the comment.
Practically speaking, I mean, the snow has to go somewhere. And I think there are places where, there might be an extra parking space on a street, and I'd almost rather like shove the snow on a parking space rather than block a sidewalk or a crosswalk. When we talk about prioritizing accessibility, clearly it's inconvenient for someone who might need that parking spot, but temporarily that may be a better compromise. Because I realize that the snow does have to go somewhere.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Other council requests? Okay, I've got some. In response to the public comments we received, it's a shame that there won't be a Tinner Hill Music Festival this year. And I noted in the public comment that there was a discussion that was going to happen last week to talk about how we can still support the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. So maybe separately, let's talk about any recommendations coming out of that group. I think that'll be a missed event this summer. So I would be interested in figuring out how we can support them. The other one was a comment around traffic calming for Southwest. Could someone reach out to that resident? Because I know that there is an active NTC case for Southwest underway. And so the feedback they provided around where they noticed speeding, I think would be useful to that effort.
We will. I think we already have, but we certainly, I don't know that we've contacted the person yet, but the NTC group is aware of it, and we will follow up.
Great. And then on that note, Southwest, I think Chief Fard and I and others were in a meeting with that neighborhood back in December, and we had committed to getting back to them by mid-February, which is coming up. And so I'd like to make sure we stick to that commitment.
Yeah.
Next thing, Whole Foods. So it was great to see another option open in the city last week to much fanfare. I have gotten some concerns about people exiting on Park Place and the timing of those lights. I don't know whether some of that's just growing pains as people get used to it, but wanted to request that our transportation engineers keep an eye on the intersection of Park Place and North Washington. Sure. Ms. Connolly wants to add to that.
I just want to add to that because today I was in that intersection. I saw two cars making U-turns. They were coming down Washington Street and they missed the turn and they were making a U-turn on Broad Street to go back up to turn in. I've never seen that before, but I saw two within about a half an hour today. So that may be another traffic pattern to just be aware of.
And then as it relates to, in general, I think everyone was really excited about Whole Foods opening, albeit a little late. There's an incorrect soundbite out there that I want to just be on the record to correct. I think as it relates to the FY26 budget, people perceive there to be a budget shortfall due to the delay of Whole Foods opening a few months late. I'm pretty sure that's incorrect because the FY26 budget starts July 1st, 2026. And so Whole Foods opening right now is actually the previous fiscal year. So those are unrelated things. And so I want to make sure that whatever soundbite is out there that we correct that. And Mr. Shields would welcome any comments from you on that as well.
No, it's great to have the Whole Foods open and a member of our community. FY26 forecasts are assumed that it would be open. FY25, the current year, we're looking at meals tax and sales tax revenues, and I think we have reported to the council that they are below our budget forecasts, and that's something that we're keeping a close eye on. But that's an FY25 situation, not an FY26 situation.
Great. Thank you for that. I think that is it. Any final council requests?
Madam Mayor,
Oh, go ahead.
were we going to, I think you mentioned, you were summarizing your comments, you were going to talk about the impact of federal developments.
Thank you. So maybe just two things to share. One, city staff is working with the city council to, and our congressional delegation to try to track the things that are happening at the federal level. The city has relied on enacted laws by Congress and signed by the president, and now there are executive orders that kind of are interposing themselves between those laws that were adopted and grants that were awarded. We don't know the final disposition of that, but we're watching it, and we do have concerns about it, particularly with respect to our capital improvements program, where we have federal dollars for many of our walkability, for many of our transportation improvement projects, as well as many of our environmental projects that are happening in the city. So there are direct impacts to the city government itself. Also in communication with the schools, just in terms of impacts on the school budget. Kind of at the human level, however, city staff is very aware of the fact that our community is made up of dedicated federal civil servants, and this is a time of great stress and difficulty for many of them as they're navigating this in terms of their service to this country. And I simply want to relay that this workforce in the City of Falls Church is here to support our federal colleagues and deep appreciation for their service. And we're very aware of the impacts that it has on our community. We want to be helpful in everything we do as we try to navigate that together.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a couple comments. I think to add to the list, consider the effects of the tariffs on things like vehicles, construction materials, all things that are relevant to government operations. So you might want to add, in addition to the potential effects on grants that we've seen so far, and we might want to add to that the potential effect of tariffs on a lot of city purchases, not just CIP issues, but current operational purchases. And finally, just a quick comment. What we've seen so far is sort of inhuman policies being pursued inhumanly, both domestically and internationally. And perhaps beyond that, things are being done in a way to maximize both disruption and cost. Anybody who's managed a project knows that when you stop it and restart it, that there's a cost to that. So just a couple observations so far, but within the context of local government, I think we need to keep monitoring things and advocating on behalf of our citizens and on behalf of the government that our citizens are paying for and expect us to deliver, and we're proud and very committed to delivering those services. So thanks much for your work, and it seems each day there are more factors that could negatively affect both our citizens and us, so we need to stay on it and determine from a policy standpoint, and we'll have a legislative committee meeting hopefully this Friday that'll be announced. We can talk about the policy issues more there, but the most immediate budget and financial issues are what needs to also have our attention. So thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. If I could put a finer point on that impact assessment that I raised, I think, actually back in December and then again at our last meeting. So I agree with Mr. Snyder's comments on all the impacts at the federal level are certainly cruel and chaotic and actually just makes everything really difficult to plan. But on the impact assessment, I think the tariffs cost is a good one. Operating budgets clearly will be impacted. Grants that we were relying on for CIP. In the near term, the HVAC community center project we all discussed and approved assumed there were tax credits, which may be at risk. And so that obviously factors into the cost. So that's potential contingencies we'll need to plan for in the budget. And I think 10% of our regional population is a direct federal worker. And obviously that doesn't even account for people who are contractors and work in related industries. Obviously, people are worried about their jobs. One of the first things they're going to be concerned about is cutting back on spending. And so what does that mean for our assumptions on our revenue projections for FY26? And so this is pretty far-reaching impacts at the local government level. I think we've all had conversations with both our state and federal reps on how we can be a safety net for people during those times. And so I'd encourage both the legislative committee and all of us to continue that. I think luckily Virginia is looking at a $3.5 billion surplus. And so hopefully we will have support in Richmond to help out where possible too. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, last week or the week before, Senator Salim and Delegate Simon were here in these chambers, offering a town hall for our residents. And I think that it was our residents were very grateful to just hear from our state representatives and just knowing that there is that support. And, I saw today, too, that Senator Kane and Senator Warner were offering a call-in town hall. So I think one of the things that, our local government, and I know Mayor Hardy and I have talked about this, that times are tough, but I think we focus on the fact that we have great local government, we have great delegate, great state senator, terrific, federal senators. We have Congressman Beyer. So we have great representation, and I think that we really need to just put all that effort we can into working with those representatives, and in terms of and knowing, having our residents know that we are going to provide whatever the utmost support that we can. But I just found it personally gratifying when we were all down in Richmond meeting with our representatives, and again in the town hall up in Falls Church City just a couple days later. It just definitely put my mind at ease a little bit to just know that we have such great advocacy down in Richmond and at the federal level. Thanks.
Thank you all. Okay, with that, are we ready to move on to business on the agenda? Okay, Madam Clerk, can you call the first item, please?
TO 25-01 is an ordinance to amend the code of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, Chapter 28, miscellaneous offenses, to add Article 8, hunting, prohibiting hunting within the municipal boundaries of the City of Falls Church, and to delete subsection D6 of Chapter 28, miscellaneous offenses, Article 6, offenses against the peace and good order, Section 28-150, carrying concealed weapons, which references lawful hunting and is rendered obsolete by the former action.
And Mayor, I want to introduce Maria Rojas, who you met at the work session. She's the executive assistant to the city attorney. She's been working with the city police department to develop this ordinance, and it's now before you for first reading, and the staff recommendation is to adopt this on first reading tonight. I'll turn it over to Ms. Rojas for a brief staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, Madam Mayor. Good evening, members of council. Although we reviewed some of the background during our work session, for the sake of the public, we would like to highlight a few items within the background. While not a common occurrence, instances of hunting have occurred on private property within the city. Our City of Falls Church law enforcement contacted the city attorney's office to seek guidance and to ensure proper enforcement mechanisms were in place to regulate and to respond to hunting incidents. As noted on line 16, hunting is recognized as a right in Virginia. To hunt legally in Virginia, individuals must obtain a hunting license. However, private homeowners and their immediate families are exempt from this requirement, and unless there are local regulations that are in effect. The City of Falls Church, by ordinance, may prohibit hunting with firearms or other weapons as a part of the city when the governing body deems it is too populated to safely hunt. We did want to point out that on line 32, under Virginia Code 15.2, 1113.1, that the city must post signs to clearly identify the boundaries, but the code does not specify the number of signs that are required. The goal of the proposed ordinance, TO 2501, would be to prevent safety risks within the 2.2 square miles of the City of Falls Church, such as stray bullets or arrows, particularly within the densely populated area. In working within the police department, on line 78, we did outline those safety concerns that were that we have with firearms and archery equipment. During the work session, some questions were raised, starting at line 123. One of those topics and questions were, how does the proposed ordinance affect City Council's ability to establish a deer management program? The city can contact the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, who can implement a wildlife management program for addressing overpopulation and public safety concerns. Another item we would like to highlight is, how does the proposed ordinance affect trapping of rats, mice, or other small animals? The term trap, take, and snare were eliminated from the definition of hunting. The ordinance now addresses only the killing of injured birds or animals with a weapon, and the term weapon does not include traps. As amended, the ordinance does not regulate trapping of small animals on private property. The fiscal impact under Virginia Code 15.2, 1113.1, signage is required, and there would be nominal cost associated with the purchase and installation of signs. The timing, the public hearing and second reading, if adopted tonight, would then be scheduled for February 24th, 2025. And then with this ordinance would then be submitted to the state for the Virginia Wildlife Resources for inclusion in the Virginia Hunting and Trapping Regulations Digest, and that must occur before May 1st of 2025. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for responding to the comments and questions we had from last week.
Absolutely.
Do we have any questions or comments from Ms. Rojas?
Just a quick note of thanks to echo Mayor Hardy's comments. I thought the shaded gray area was terrific, especially for the public who is looking over this. I really appreciated the definition of how we can determine if we are being officially overpopulated with deers. That was very helpful. And then also just assuring the public that by us passing this, it doesn't mean that we can't at a future date initiate some sort of measures to control the population. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, do we have a motion?
Move to grant first reading to TO 25-01 and to schedule a public hearing and second reading for February 24th, 2025.
Second. Ms. Connolly on the second. Madam Clerk, call roll, please.
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes?
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
And Mayor Hardy.
Yes.
The motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
See you back in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think we're on to consent before work session. So does anyone, these are all the items that we reviewed in work session last week. Do we want to discuss any of them further, or no? Vice Mayor?
And yes, I had a question about the paving. I know we had discussed earlier this evening about the contractor who's working on the crossing at WNOD. Is that contractor also responsible for paving in this particular consent item?
Let me check real quick.
I thought it said Sawgrass, and I see Espina, Finley, Asphalt.
And Arthur, yes, it doesn't matter.
So I was just thinking, if, is there any concern about re-upping with any of the contractors that are in this consent, given the quality of service we might have received this year.
Right. So it is, the WNOD project was done by Sagres Construction, so it's not one of these that are in the paving contract. So, I mean, that's this
Okay,
contract.
I was just thinking about that as we're moving forward and want to make sure that each time on these consent, we're thinking about the contracts and we're using the best available to us at the best price. Thanks.
It's a good consideration. Ms. Downs?
And I will note, we have in the past put certain paving contractors on the no-bid list after they've, not met performance requirements. So that is something that our staff will do if a contractor's not doing the work that's required for the taxpayers.
Great.
Downs?
Thank you. Well, first, I loved the picture of the playground equipment. That looked really fun. If I was limber enough, I would try it out once it's installed, but I really appreciate that. But I actually wanted to talk about the Capital Bike Share. I was looking at the map, and I appreciated looking at this and the new, I guess let's see, it's the proposed Capital Bike Share station that looks like it's going in on South Oak, which is good. I just had a quick question. So it looks like, obviously, are most of those stations in more commercial corridors? I mean, it looks like, my question is, looking at sort of my neighborhood, which is, I guess you would call it the Broadmont area, the bottom there, where East Broad and East Columbia, there's not really one in that section. And I'm assuming that's because it's more residential. There's not as much commercial. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of a density question. We would like to put them in places where we think they're going to be used to the maximum.
Right.
And that is why that area doesn't have the density. That's why it doesn't have the stations.
Okay, that makes sense. But I am glad to see the one on South Oak. I think that makes sense with Oak Street Elementary over in that area and all that. So that's good to see.
And that is very much Oak Street focused.
Right.
So it's kind of an experiment, and we hope it will be used. But all of these, we evaluate them and we'll make changes if they're not being used.
Okay. I really appreciate this map. Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Ms. Underhill?
Actually, just wanted to follow up on that. Has there been any talk about putting a bike dock on the WNOD or near the WNOD?
So the Park Authority will not allow one on its property.
I figured.
So we do try to get them adjacent. So you do see, for instance, Station 1 at Founders Row. We wanted that one to be right on the trail, and we were not allowed to. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we moved it to Northwest, and there wasn't enough sunlight.
That's
And
right.
that's when we finally moved it to Broad, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
Mr. Snyder?
Thanks. I had a question about the design-build procedures. Is there any we've used design-build, haven't we?
Well, the schools have.
Right.
They use it for the Mary Ellen Henderson. It was
Right.
the first time the schools used it, and they've used it really for every for every school building since then.
Right.
The city used it for the fire station, and that was really early days with design build back in the late 90s. But we, on the general government side, have not used it since then. And so we would want to have some more consultation with the city council before we chose that procurement method. But adopting these guidelines sort of opens the doors that we'd be able to have that conversation in the future.
Yeah, that really goes to the question that I had, which is, are there any potential major changes in procedures, public awareness, all these kinds of things? And what you're saying is we can deal with that later, that this is generally just authorizing consideration of this in the future. Is that right?
That's
okay,
right.
Thanks.
Final questions or comments on the consent packet? Do we have a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
We have a second?
Second.
Ms. Connolly on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Downs?
Yes?
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Shantziska?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Thank you, council. The motion carries 7-0.
Great. Well, let's move on to work session now. And we swapped the agenda items, so we're actually going to take the co-responder program report first from Ms. Jones and Chief Fard, and maybe Dr. Bracy.
So we have Chief Ford here in the room, and we have Ms. Jones, Director of Human Services online, and Dr. Bracy, who's our clinical counselor at the Aurora House, and she's going to be our lead presenter tonight. And just for council's, kind of just to set the stage, we came to the council maybe 18 months ago, over a year ago, to discuss a pilot program where Dr. Bracy would serve as an advisor to the police department as they respond on critical incidents where people might be having a mental health crisis and have dialed 911. And so we wanted to report tonight on what we learned in that pilot program. And I don't know who I turn it over to first.
Dr. Bracy.
We're gonna, are we giving it straight over to Dr. Bracy?
I think so.
That sounds like a great idea. Dr. Bracy, thank you for your great work on this pilot program, and we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening, council members, and thank you, Wyatt, for that introduction. So again, I'm Tanisha Bracy, and I am here to give just a brief status update on the piloting of our city's co-response team. We can go, thank you. And I do recognize that everyone may not be fully informed about Marcus Alert. So I'll just give a little brief overview and refresher of the basis for the reason for this pilot. The Marcus Alert law came into effect in 2020 and requires that law enforcement and behavioral health entities establish a collaborative and formalized response to behavioral health calls to 911. Next slide. I'm sorry. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. The regional CSBs were required to develop and implement the response to Marcus Alert for their catchment areas. And we, of course, fall under the Fairfax Falls Church CSB, which offers us access to their emergency services clinicians as well as their mobile crisis team. You can go to the next one. So, however, we felt that there could be room for a more targeted response for City of Falls Church community members. Next. And as a result, the City of Falls Church Police Department and I entered into an MOU to pilot activities that could give us some insight into what a collaborative and coordinated response between our police department and a dedicated clinician might look like. So we formally began the pilot at the start of fiscal year 24, and it continued through fiscal year 25. We can go to the next, thank you. And since we began, I've been able to collaborate with the police department and other city agencies on numerous cases, and the activities have included coordinated outreach to unhoused individuals, consultation with the City of Falls Church Public Schools, engagement and providing resources to community members, and co-responding with our police to psychiatric crisis situations. And through our work, we have gained some insights along the way. And first, it really highlighted the gaps in information sharing between behavioral health entities and our police department. And it also highlighted the obstacles that arise as we try to navigate our different legal and behavioral health jurisdictions. We also became aware of the need for clinical consultation and support with the schools and within the Department of Housing and Human Services, especially with regard to unhoused individuals. And we also noted that it seems the city has few direct referral avenues for behavioral health resources, and that our police department that works hard to manage and follow up cases, and that's quite impressive, but it is also time consuming and can be in excess of their role. And so the things learned help set what we see as the foundation of a potential role for a full-time behavioral health clinician, which could be to help bridge gaps in communication and help navigate our systems, and essentially to provide support to community members and other city departments, to provide clinical consultation, initial intervention, linkage to services, case management follow-up, and to build partnerships with available resources and services. We can go to the next. So the activities that I did engage in actually came to our attention by way of initial calls to 911. And so what you see here are the statistics for calls to service, and more specifically behavioral health related calls to services for all of fiscal year 24 on the left side, and for the first half of FY 25, on the right. And I just want to note that the behavioral calls for the first 6 months of fiscal year 25 is already more than half of the total for fiscal year 24. And of course, if this continues, we're likely to see an overall increase in behavioral calls and need as we round out the end of the fiscal year. We can move to the next thing. So given our activities and what we see as the trend in the call data, we believe that there is room for a full-time behavioral health specialist that could be housed within the Department of Housing and Human Services and work to support HHS, the police department, the schools, and the community as a whole. We would want that candidate to be independently licensed or license eligible, and I'm available to provide clinical supervision. Next slide. And we see the primary goals, the reasons for increasing our behavioral health support would be to support community members with behavioral health needs, as well as the PD when working with these individuals, to increase awareness, decrease psychiatric hospitalization, and to provide follow-up case management. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bracey. Chief Fard, anything else to add before we jump into questions or discussion?
Sure. Yeah, just probably helpful just give a little context from the police department side. You know, we know from the police side that police interactions with persons exhibiting mental health issues can pose a significant challenge, not only for the community, but also for responding police officers. We do use the crisis intervention team model within the police department. The Falls Church Police Department has for years, and our percentage of police officers trained, it's really, really good compared to other jurisdictions. Currently, as of calendar year 2024, 100% of our patrol and criminal investigation staff are trained in CID. Of all of our sworn staff, including me, we have about 85% trained up. We are constantly looking at annual refresher training. We recently rolled out some de-escalation training, 2 different online training for our non-sworn staff, our dispatchers, and other non-sworn staff who have interaction with folks that may be experiencing mental health issues. So our policy with these types of issues are always using alternatives to arrest, such as citations, summons, referrals, and formal resolutions and warnings. Of course, if we have a mental health provider that our officers can contact and give us that non-law enforcement services, it's a very good benefit for a positive outcome.
Great, thank you. Questions and comments? Mr. Snyder.
Thanks a lot, Madam Mayor. So can I go back to the slide that talks about the number of calls per year? Yeah. Yeah.
Page 7.
Yep. So, so 81 calls seems, it's important, but it's hard to justify an additional staff person based on 81 calls. So tell me what are the alternatives for making the program run effectively, other than the cost, considering the tough budget environment that we're in, of hiring an additional person, which I understand is one of the recommendations. So Again, 81 calls a year, they're all important, and we have trained police officers, as we've just heard. So I'm not hearing a fully fleshed out justification for an additional person. Let me put it that way. Thanks.
Sure.
And I'm open to it, but I'm not hearing it based upon the number of calls and what we're seeing so far.
No, it's a really, really good point. I think one of the challenges that we have in Falls Church is having to rely on another jurisdiction's CSB and limited mental health resources out there. I can tell you during the time that I've been here, it's that one incident where the person doesn't want to cooperate, and you're looking at, a potential barricade situation or a situation where a person can not only be a harm to themselves but others around them. And, 2 o'clock in the morning or Saturday afternoon, having to rely on another jurisdiction's mental health provider does provide significant challenges. So, and I think, I don't know if Ms. Jones wants to pipe in from her side, because the mental health professional that she would be asking for will provide other resources other than those particular calls that Mr. Snyder pointed out.
Ms. Jones, why don't you jump in since Chief Hard called on you?
Good evening, everyone. I'll jump in and say that from the HHS side, we've seen an increase in the number of homeless persons in the city that have mental health, situations going on, and it's become a lot. Especially in this past year, residents from different communities have called into our offices. We have one human services specialist, and it's kind of hard for her to respond to the number of calls that we've gotten. And it's like the individuals that she is seeing now have different layers of needs, and Leslie's not able to address all of that. And Dr. Bracy has gone out with her several times to meet with homeless individuals throughout the city, and it's been a big help because, we're looking at a clinician, someone that's license eligible that would be able to do casework on the site and make those connections for people. And so that would be extremely helpful on our side. Dr. Brace, I saw you had, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, you mentioned what I was going to mention, just that the calls are sort of the basis, but not the only piece of it. I think that's a way because of how we were piloting the program, that is how a lot of these cases came to my awareness. I also think there's plenty of room where we don't need to have things come through 911. I have had calls from the schools come in to consult about kids that they're having some difficulties with, to consult about possible resources. I just think there is room that expands beyond just relying on the call system, which is why we also thought broader about where this clinician may be placed and how it could be used in a broader sense, rather than just confining it to a co-response model, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Flynn had your hand up.
Yeah, so thank you to all of you for the presentation. In doing some of the answers to Mr. Snyder just now, you already touched upon some of the questions I had, but I first wanted to thank the chief. I know that we talked about this position during last year's budget cycle, and that we particularly asked for information sort of about mental health needs and calls, recognizing both, state law, but also Title II obligations under the ADA that the city separately has in terms of, accommodating people with disabilities and police and law enforcement interactions. And so I really appreciate, both at that time, you're explaining sort of the CIT model in the police department and how many of our officers, were CIT trained and continue to be. So, but that also, you've used this time to work more closely with HHS and Dr. Bracey to really identify whether the need was there and kind of what would be the best path forward in terms of whether this, role is justifiable or not. And I also just wanted to touch on, the prolonged interactions, that some of these calls do require and sort of the nature of the follow-up services. And then kind of had a question about housing this person, not questioning it, but just, the basis for housing the position within HHS with availability to the police department, for example, rather than having the person within the police department, which Dr. Bracey just touched upon. But I think in getting to that question, if you can also just answer sort of how you envision this individual in terms of like on-call availability, because when we think about the police force, we think of sort of round-the-clock support for various needs, whereas HHS, often people think of, city department with certain standard hours that doesn't have the same, bandwidth as the police department. So sort of how you envision this person kind of functioning in somewhat of a dual role, even if they're within HHS for like classification purposes.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. And I'm sorry. I always also meant to give a little bit of a shout out to Major Chetri and Sergeant Wood, who have been really working with HHS on this program. In terms of the question, we have been working on a potential job description for this position and dividing those duties in terms of percentage of how much of that percentage would go to the police department and HHS. Certainly one person is not going to be available around the clock for us, but from a case management perspective on those more critical cases where we do need that follow-up, and just having that person that we can contact would be extremely beneficial. But there are going to be instances, you're absolutely right, not having 24-hour coverage 7 days a week with one person, that is still going to be, put some limitations on our ability to have those resources. But it'll be better than what we have right now.
Ms. Jones, you have your hand up for a response?
Yes, thank you. I'll add also that if it's a clinician, they need to be supervised by another, clinician. So that's why Dr. Bracey would be supervising them. And then we would have the space in our office, we're looking at, they would kind of have a work schedule where they would set it during the week, and they would be available to PD and available to us, because neither one of us need them, the whole 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day. Leslyn has needs where she goes out after work, to, visit homeless and see what their needs are and that kind of thing. And then this person may have to work weekends, or, what I mean? It's going to be a flex schedule depending on what the needs are. But Dr. Bracey is going to have to supervise them. And so that's why we felt we would house them within HHS, because Dr. Bracey works for HHS.
And I will add that most of the models that we looked at in terms of co-responder programs in other parts of the country, typically the clinician does stay with the HHS department of that locality.
And Mayor, if I could note, one, I think we're really very fortunate to have Dr. Bracey here with the city, to have that type of expertise and experience to assist the city, not just at the Aurora House, but and she's been very generous with her time with other departments, and to have a police department that is so forward-leaning in terms of being trained to respond appropriately when there is a mental health crisis that comes through the 911 system. But I did want the council to know this proposal that is before you tonight is not, there's not something you have to make a decision on tonight. We're anticipating, this is kind of a pre-discussion of things we're working out internally about how to meet this need, and we would then have a conversation with you in the context of the FY26 budget, where this need is, council will be evaluating it with all the other needs. There's kind of a preview of one of the conversations we think would be very important for us to have for FY26.
Thank you for that. Ms. Downs?
Thank you, everyone, for this presentation. I applaud the effort, and it's very interesting. And I think, Chief Fardy, you're exactly right that, these situations can quickly devolve and go down quickly. And, one of the things I would say is, well, first, I know we're going to discuss this more, but I think, if we were to find the funding and have this position, I think that person would need to make sure that that schedule is flexible, that there are going to be times that that person may need to, be on call on a weekend and that sort of. So I think that would be something that, if at some point down the line we had this position that person knew that they had to be flexible. And I appreciate Mr. Snyder's comments about the budget constraints that we have. But, again, this is one of those things that I think it just takes one incident to go badly. And, we need that support. We hear it on the news all the time about mental health issues. And when, despite, best trained officers, just having another layer of support can only help. And I will say that as our population continues to increase, and we all like to talk about infrastructure, I think this is something that we really do need to think about, because we're only going to have more and more calls as we have more and more residents moving into the city. So thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, I have some. So thank you for this, because I remember the discussion we had in 2020, 2021, and I think several of us were very interested in this co-responder model. So I'm glad we piloted it, and thank you for the recommendations and the work here. I will say that I, in general, really support the idea of being innovative, and how I think Ms. Downs made a really good point that this is an important part of kind of how we reform our thinking around criminal justice, because I think clearly mental health, I think we heard some really compelling stories how it often takes up so much time from your officers. I also share some concern, as Mr. Snyder, of making sure that we hold a really high bar for all FTEs, especially in really tough budget cycles like this. And so when you look at slide 7, where it says, gosh, you only had 80 out of 81 calls for service, 81 out of the 30,000 calls for service, that certainly speaks to, do you really need a full-time FTE? What might be helpful in making the case is, while those are small calls for service, they are very time-consuming from what I understand, and obviously they carry on beyond that initial call. And so helping us understand, each time you get a call for service, what does that mean if you normally had an officer deployed to that versus having someone who is actually trained to help de-escalate and work through that? That might be helpful to help us understand what this role could potentially fulfill. And I think the second element is how outcomes might be different using kind of a dedicated model like this versus relying on people to be CIT trained, or even getting someone out of Fairfax County where we leverage a lot of the CSB resources. I think speaking to those 2 points could help kind of make a better case for why we might want a dedicated resource for Falls Church.
Okay.
I have a question, because I think I noticed in one of the slides, it called out Fairfax City. Are they one of the jurisdictions that has a dedicated person, a co-responder model? Or do we have other examples, I guess is what I would say.
I believe
Fairfax City does.
Yeah.
And do we have any learnings from them? Obviously, they're a little bit bigger than we are, but do they have one for the population? Or like, what's their staffing levels? How have they used that person?
Well, they have their team consists of a clinician, a police officer, and I believe actually an EMT. So they have a 3-person team that is a co-response team that monitors their radio and will go out on calls. And they also do a lot of the work that we talked about within their Housing and Human Services type department, where they will respond to some calls from elderly individuals, do a lot of follow-up and linkage, and working with the unhoused population as well. The last time I spoke with their clinician, they were actually looking at the potential of adding a part-time clinician. So what they found is that there's a lot of case management, a lot of follow-up, a lot of resource finding that they're doing, and it does get time consuming. And so I think they've been working, it's almost 2 to 3 years that they've been working at this, and it's growing.
Great. Well, that's helpful to know. I think it would be helpful to benchmark kind of how their model has worked and how that would apply here. It sounds like they clearly have, they had that need in Fairfax City and have found a model that works. Ms. Flynn, you have a question you want to jump in on?
Oh, yeah, I just had one question. So on the numbers, of the whatever that was, 29,000 plus calls with 81 behavioral health related and 14,000 plus in 6 months on 50 behavioral health related. I did have kind of questions about kind of how we identified the 81 versus the 50, and were those ones that were transferred to the regional center? Because with numbers, that high on the calls for service, I would imagine or assume that the numbers for the police department of when the police department may actually enlist this individual would be higher than 81 or 50. It's just the subset looks much smaller than it would actually be for what the utilization rate might be relative to those calls for service, given comorbidities and law enforcement kind of responses.
Yeah, I can tell you from looking at other jurisdictions, for example, Alexandria, where I came from, we started with one team there, and once the officers, the patrol officers, the detectives learn about the value of the program, they start soliciting for that assistance greater. And the need starts actually rising from your initial benchmarking for your pilot program. So in Alexandria, they've grown. I think they have 3 or 4 teams now. In terms of the call for service data, so I don't have it for the fiscal year that's captured in the presentation, but I do have it for calendar year 2024. It's about the same. So the number that's on the screen there, that includes a lot of self-initiated calls for service that officers conduct. If I were to parse out the number of calls that we typically get from the community, the ones that calling 911 or non-emergency for calendar year 2024 is about 6,000. So the large majority of our calls are self-initiated, about 6,000 and some change are requests from the community to respond. But further, the numbers that you see out there are calls for service that are classified. We have different, classifications, and we have a classification for suicide. We have a classification for mental health, where there's no other crime offense being captured for that type of call that's being made. But that doesn't really tell us that, how many larceny calls did we go to, and of those, how many of those were mental health related? And we talked about this last April when I spoke to council. It's really hard to parse out those numbers of mental health related incidents, but mental health is not the primary reason we're there. So the numbers on the screen was where there's no other offense present. It was just either a suicide or a mental health call. But that number is probably a lot higher if we account for crimes.
So I guess that's what I was getting at, that the 81 and the 50 seem to be capturing acute behavioral health or mental health sort of calls limited, so to speak, to that issue, but it may be underrepresenting sort of the mental health or behavioral health needs overall within that calls for service number.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Thanks a lot, Madam Mayor. I wanted to follow up, too, on a comment that was made about unhoused individuals, and I'm wondering if there's any data on trends we're seeing in the city on that issue. I'm personally familiar with working with unhoused individuals, as I do in connection with my church, and I realize that oftentimes there are multiple mental health and other issues that need to be addressed to effectively serve that population. So my question is, since it was mentioned as a potential justification, do we have any data on unhoused individuals in the city?
Dana, you want to speak to that real quick, and I can piggyback off of you?
Sure. Let's see. We track that. Of course, I don't have the exact. I can get that information to you. I know we just completed our point in time survey that all the localities do, and but it was a very, very cold day, so we only had one person that was out. But I can say that Leslyn has said that there seems to be more calls from residents to her as far as, needs of homeless individuals. I mean, it's just, she spends a lot of her time doing that. As a matter of fact, we brought together a work group this year with PD, ourselves, and other departments because the need was growing so great. This was an area of the city over by the Falls, that community, the Falls Church. There was an issue earlier this year that we were all working together to address. Chief, I'm not sure if you remember how many exactly were there, but I know that we had an incident over there that we were trying to address as a team.
I don't remember that number. But Mr. Snyder, I can tell you not to generalize that, homeless populations are responsible for all our trespassing calls. But we do know that a lot of our trespassing calls that come into the police department are for folks that perhaps don't have a place to go. And I can tell you in calendar year 2014, we had 116 of those calls. But there's other types of nuisance activity type calls that the police department catches for those. But that's just one window of data, if that helps you.
So thanks a lot, if I might, Madam Mayor, as we continue to discuss this, having some additional data on unhoused populations, because that would be a worthy addition to constructing a justifiable approach to an additional clinician. In addition, fire and EMS services often deal with people with behavioral health challenges, and I'm wondering if there's any data available from fire and EMS. And again, it may not be available tonight, but would the clinician be able to interact with fire and EMS and basically support their efforts, or is that already being done through the Arlington Fire Department? Just want to add that as an additional factor, as behavioral health issues are often presented to fire and EMS, even when there's not police called to the scene. And is there opportunity to assist that service as well?
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll make sure I look into that.
On the homelessness.
And I will, I'll get those numbers from our client database and provide them.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, we participate in the COG point-in-time survey on homelessness, and so I'm on the COG Human Services Committee, and I think a couple months ago they reported that across the region, all the jurisdictions saw about an 11% increase in people experiencing homelessness. I imagine Falls Church is not immune to it. I have the report, and we can email it out. I think we're part of the Fairfax County survey data. And so anecdotally, we certainly get a lot more. I certainly have gotten more concerns from residents about it, and so I imagine that the data would probably reflect that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, to sum up, I guess what I would recommend is, given that we all want to hold a high bar for adding extra FTEs, I think having more data on the amount of time that is spent responding to behavioral health crises is important. How might outcomes be different in this model? And then third, being able to compare alternatives that you all considered, as well as learnings from Fairfax City and other small jurisdictions, I think could make a more compelling case for kind of adding that resource. But thank you very much. I think in concept, many of us agree that this is an important step to take.
Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Bracey and Ms. Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you for moving me up
Thank
the
you.
agenda.
And Ms. Bazemore, thank you for your patience. We swapped you on the agenda.
So Ms. Bazemore is our staff lead for the Parklet naming project, and so we're going to give you a report on what we learned from our boards and commissions and from our public comment. And Ms. Bazemore, thank you for spearheading this effort. And I might suggest, coming up with a name by committee at the dais could be a challenge, and it may be the council, after hearing the presentation, having some discussion, it may be the council might want to appoint a smaller group to maybe work with Ms. Bazemore, see if you can't arrive at a short list or and then come back to the council. That's just one idea as a way to possibly proceed. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Bazemore for the report.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that sounds like a great idea. I know the last time I was here, which was all the way back in November, someone had mentioned casting a broad net. I think we did that, and we got a lot of different recommendations throughout the process. So good evening, Council. Tonight, Council is requested to review recommendations gathered from city boards, commissions, and the public for 2 new parklets located in the South Washington Street corridor at 190 South Washington Street and at 430 South Maple Avenue. Council is requested to select 2 preferred names in preparation for a public hearing on the matter that is scheduled for February 24th. So again, staff recommends that the City Council select names for the parklets to be advertised for that February 24th public hearing. So the last time I was here was back in November, specifically November 12th of 2024. City Council adopted a motion to solicit parklet name suggestions or recommendations from the general public and also from the Planning Commission, the Historical Commission, the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board, the Arts and Humanities Council, and the Economic Development Authority. We were able to make it to all groups and got feedback from all groups. City staff designed 2 parklets in the South Washington Street corridor. One is located at 190 South Washington Street and the other at 430 South Maple, and they've both been completed. These 2 parklets were funded with American Rescue Plan Act support, or ARPA support, and staff worked with the Economic Development Authority to ensure that ARPA funds are properly spent in support of economic resilience and recovery goals. Something that has changed since I last saw you guys was that during their meeting on December 3rd, the EDA delayed the project that was located at 410 South Washington Street that was referred to as Vision Care Alley. They deferred it to follow the completion of the adjacent Quinn Mixed Use Continuing Care project. This is potentially 3 years out. So this remaining parklet was funded with local dollars instead of ARPA support. These parklets do not have names yet. Naming of public facilities provides an opportunity to both promote the parklets and highlight the history of the city and even more specifically the South Washington Street corridor. If you go to the second page of the staff report, I've added in some photos. So this is 430 South Maple, that parklet right there. And then right underneath is 190 South Washington Street. All right, and then if we'll go to the third page of the staff report, you can also see them on the map. My apologies if I keep clearing my throat. I am coming down from a cold. So on line 38, we have our naming process. So the city code lists the following requirements for naming public property or facilities. And I'm just gonna read this right out of the staff report as a refresher. So section A, criteria for naming city facilities. City facilities, including buildings and parks, shall generally be named according to the geographical, historical, or ecological relationships in which the site is located. Exceptions may be made in the following circumstances. Number 1, to commemorate an individual's service, facilities may be named after an individual who has made significant contributions to the City of Falls Church through participation in community, state, or national service. Number 2, to help identify the facility's purpose or usage. A name may be assigned to a city facility if it helps to describe and identify the usage or purpose of the facility. Moving on to section C, process for naming city facilities. Number 1, the naming of any city-owned park, building, or other city-owned facility may be or shall be by resolution of the City Council. Number 2, individuals and or organizations may make recommendations to City Council regarding the naming or renaming of facilities, parks, public open space areas, and other related components of facilities. And finally, number 3, prior to adopting a resolution naming a city-owned facility, the City Council shall hold a public hearing and shall seek a recommendation from the following groups: the Planning Commission, the Historical Commission, the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board, and any other boards and or commissions or community organizations that the City Council deems appropriate. So moving on to line 63, this is our planning analysis looking at themes. So these are some guiding questions kind of following those city code themes. And these are the following. If it is a person, what impact has he or she had on the city? If it is a historical event, how was the city involved? If it is a natural or geographical feature, why should the name of this parklet reflect that feature? And these were highlighted on the project's webpage to help folks who visit the page get an idea of that analysis. Public input beginning on line 72. So staff launched a webpage for the Parklet naming project back on November 15th, 2024. The public was invited to submit name suggestions for the parklets via email to city staff. Name submittals were accepted through email until January 15th of 2025. This falls in line with the last Planning Commission meeting where they reviewed all of the names. The project was posted on the city's social media, the EDO social media, the city newsletter, The Focus, the library, and the library's information screens. The following summarizes the feedback collected from various boards and commissions. Again, the groups that have seen this project were the EDA, the Historical Commission, the Arts and Humanities Council, the Planning Commission, and the advisory boards of Recreation and Parks. We also requested feedback from Aurora House and the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. So getting right into it, the EDA reviewed the project on December 3rd of 2024, and you'll see all of the different feedback from the boards and commissions in an attachment to the staff report. Many of them submitted memos reflecting their recommendations. We also have a table as an attachment to the staff report that's reflective of the different name suggestions that we got from the community since the launch of the project webpage. So the EDA, they express support for names that are both easy to spell and pronounce. For example, the Cavalier Trail Plaza, and not names of people. The Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, they recommended several different names. So for 430 South Maple Avenue, they recommended the Toxinot or Dogue Indigenous Peoples. And then for South Maple, they recommended Cato Adams. The Advisory Board of Recreation and Parks. So they reviewed the project on their meeting in December, specifically December 11th. They actually recommended against the naming of parklets to commemorate individuals. Their name for 430 South Maple Avenue, that name suggestion was Cavalier Trail Wayside. And that's just to ensure that there's consistency with the location being adjacent to the Cavalier Trail. They also recommended the name for 190 South Washington Street, Rolling Roads Park or Parklet. And there was a memo submitted by the Advisory Board of Recreation and Parks with their name justifications and a little bit more information about the why. But I did add a note in the staff report on line 110 that there is a park space that's included as part of the Quinn project titled the Rolling Road Park. So something to keep in mind. The Historical Commission, they reviewed the project on December 12th. For 430 South Maple, they also recommended, again, recognizing Indigenous history in the area through the name Toxinot or Dogue. And then for the parklet located at 190 South Washington Street, they recommended the Foote family as a potential name to honor the Foote family and their history in the city of Falls Church. Arts and Humanities reviewed the parklet project also in December, on December 19th, for 430 South Maple. Similar to Historical Commission and the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, they recommended the Dogue Toxinot tribe. And then they also recommended the Foote family for 190 South Washington Street. Finally, the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission reviewed the project for the final time on their meeting, or in their meeting on January 15th of 2025. So they recommended that both parklets, 430 South Maple Ave and 190 South Washington Street, include place-based names that are specific to the park's local geography and not individuals. So this is similar to the Advisory Board of Recreation and Parks and the EDA. Now I'm going to move on to comments from the general public. These begin on page 6. So I just want to highlight line 145. So we had the published webpage in November 2024. Again, we received many different suggestions from the general public, with one recurring multiple times. So several community members wrote in suggesting a parklet name that honors the memory of Christina Goodwin. Christina Goodwin was a Falls Church resident and a civic leader and served as chair of the nearby Aurora House. And they had the Citizens Advisory Committee in which she served for many years. Christina passed away in March of 2024, and you'll see a stone plaza here. So a stone plaza space has been constructed between the South Maple Avenue Parklet and the Cavalier Trail Park in the memory of Christina Goodwin. So that's circular plaza right there. Moving on to line 154, these are all of the names suggested to date. So you will see some that are not in that master list of names that were submitted since the launch of the staff the project webpage. So there are several names that were captured in our last conversation all the way back in November that might look familiar. But then, of course, there are also names included here that were submitted to the project webpage, or you may have seen them also in memos from the different boards and commissions. So I also identified a couple of points of interest beginning on line 183. So common themes that I was seeing throughout just the different name recommendations. So beginning with names that focus on natural or geographical features, there were several different names recommended in relation to the Cavalier Trail Park, which is again by 430 South Maple Avenue. There was discussion about an opportunity to honor African American history in the city and also local indigenous history in the city. And then finally, that last bullet point begs the question, are there opportunities to recognize individuals in history through placemaking efforts too? So moving on to line 211, this is the legal authority when it comes to the namings. And then I'm going to skip over to page 8, which is the final page of the staff report, and look at fiscal impact very briefly. So new signage for these parklets, there is a cost estimate here between $10,000 and $15,000. And this will be paid for out of the Parklets Project account, which is part of the approved CIP program. And now I just want to focus on timing before turning it over to questions. So again, we first came to City Council back in November of 2024, kickoff work session in early November with a council referral out for public feedback and boards and commissions feedback in mid-November. We launched the website on November 15th, so shortly after we were at council, we visited all of these different groups and got feedback from all of these different groups, and again, summarized in the staff report, but also memos attached to the staff report too. And here we are back with council tonight on February 10th to discuss all of the different name suggestions that were collected, and planning to come back for a city council action on February 24th. Thank you all for having me, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Bazemore, for the very thorough report. Open up to questions and comments. Ms. Downs?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for that report. It was really very thorough. So I had a question in terms of the staff report. It looked like to me, if I was looking at lines 95 and 96, there's a line in there that talks about the indigenous people. I believe you pronounce it Dogue. Is that correct?
The Dogue, yes.
Okay. That they occupied the Falls Church area, but then when I went down to lines 207 and 208, it looks like they did not. I just wanted to see if those two items are conflicting or if I'm not understanding that.
So I did some preliminary research into the Dogue taxonomy, and based off of my research, I was seeing that their principal village was located more in Fairfax County, and Prince William, but there are trails in the area, and people were moving through the area in that point in history. However, looking at the National Park Service website, it did seem that that principal village of Toxinot was located in a different area.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And again, I really appreciate this very thorough report. I will just, for my colleagues, remind everyone that I was on the school board when we had to rename Thomas Jefferson Elementary and George Mason High School. And, so that was a very tough process. And so in general, I am not in favor of naming, parklets or anything after individuals. So I will just put that out there. But I'm still, of course, open to discussion. Thanks.
Great. Vice Mayor?
I too echo Laura's comments about thanking you for the report and the thoroughness of it. Also, the clarification on the fact that that Indigenous community passed through Falls Church but didn't live in Falls Church. And also echo your comments on naming anything after individuals. I would prefer to name them after geography or history or other points of interest. Personally, I like keeping Cavalier in the name of the parklet that's associated with the trail and the park and the area that is familiar to people. And I think it continues to further define that area. I personally really like that. I have a question for you on, I know we talked about the rolling road or rolling associated with Quinn's, but that was just a concept or an idea. We didn't officially name that, right? That will still be an official naming process when they come to site plan. I can't quite remember. Anybody remember exactly, is that officially a done deal? So we're not I thought that was just in a suggestion, or maybe we could name it.
I think they proffered it as a public park to us, and we would go through the official naming process again once it was built.
Right. So if we...
But it was specifically to recollect the rolling road that went right through there.
So that is the geographic location
That's the
of where
geographic
the rolling
location.
road was versus where this triangle park would be.
Yes.
Or is.
Yes,
already
yes,
there.
yes.
Yeah.
That's
Although
my,
I think the rolling road did continue through the Triangle Park, so I think it is related, but...
it is, yeah.
There on the other side of Annandale is kind of where it is currently laid, marked as the rolling road. And there's still a paper street there that reflects where the old rolling road
Actually was. And
yeah.
serviced the area. So I don't have an immediate, this is what I think the second one should be named, because I do like acknowledging Rolling Road. That is certainly, we know as a fact that happened. That was in Falls Church. It was in recognition of our, the African-American heritage history. It's acknowledging the problems and challenges there. So I definitely want one of those to be named that. I just, again, restate that I prefer not to have it named after individuals, given the challenges with that recent. Thank you.
Other thoughts this way?
Sorry, was that me?
Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Am I up? Oh, okay. Yeah, so I, again, just wanted to thank Ms. Bazemore and the boards and commissions and all the public comment on this. I think, there are obviously a number of good suggestions and no poor suggestions, and so many kind of deserving groups or individuals or points of interest that we could highlight, in these parks. I think for me, given sort of the geographic base location, some of the board and commission comments through EDA and Planning Commission and Rec and Parks resonated. I know that the Rec and Parks chair, Charlie O'Hara, talked about how even the parcel and the GIS system for 430 South Maple is listed, as Cavalier Trail or Cavalier Park, right? So it's not just that it's adjacent to the park, but it's classified within the city's own records, apparently as part of the park. And so Rec and Parks felt pretty strongly about not separating the aspects of Cavalier Trail Park, so whether it would be, Cavalier Trail Plaza or Cavalier Trail Wayside, I don't have strong feelings about. I do want to highlight, and I had said before to council at the time that the stone installation, was made by the Goodwin family, and they contributed and, financially supported, that installation in consultation with the city, that I do, if we can, think that it's appropriate to recognize, that contribution and that space. So regardless of, whether the South Maple Avenue parklet would be something like, Cavalier Trail Plaza, I do think it would be appropriate, to have additional signage where the stone circle is that would say something like, Christina's Reflection Garden, or, Christina's Tranquility Park, that it wouldn't have to necessarily be the parklet, but it is like in relationship, and it would be like, the Reflection Garden at Cavalier Trail or whatever it is, so that there is some sort of cohesive space. It's geography based, but there's still, recognition of that investment and that memorial that the city was aware of, was being financed, by the family for that purpose, in discussion with where it made sense to cite that because of just like privacy concerns of doing it at Aurora House. And so given, Christina's service there as chair, and not only, kind of overseeing the meetings, but kind of her work with the residents directly there, whether it was like painting rooms and making more trauma-informed spaces and having financial seminars for the girls, and sort of doing book club, and, making sure that they were thought of during holidays and whatnot. Like, I would think that potentially we could, do signage at the parklets, but then do additional signage that properly sort of recognizes that space. And for the other parklet, I would be I would be fine with something that's like Triangle Park, given that it's at the Triangle, and people are going to say, where is so-and-so park? And people may naturally respond, oh, it's at the Triangle where West Annandale and South Washington meet. So that's just kind of my input and thoughts for others' consideration.
Thank you, Erin. Debbie?
Thank you. Thank you, Erin, for bringing up Christina's Park. I absolutely support having that entire area, signed for her, acknowledging her life, her contributions to the city and to the Aurora House specifically. And in my vision, I had like the parklets one thing, and then the entire circular area that's going to also be beautifully landscaped and dedicated in April, I believe. Not acknowledging that as well. So in my mind, they're two nice parks almost. There'll be the parklet and then the Memorial Garden as well. So thank you for
and that's
mentioning all the work that she did there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to raise that so that it is, so that it's clear, and it's also not lost on, individuals who did do, who provided input and feel, very strongly about it, that if this parklet isn't, named the red parklet space in Christina's honor, that it doesn't mean that there won't be, city recognition, city signage that does reflect, those contributions that could occur adjacent to whatever the parklet might be called.
Agreed.
And I'll second that. I think we can assure the public that we all are grateful for Christina's contributions, and thank you, Ms. Flynn, for mentioning that. And, I, of course, completely agree with Ms. Hiscock and Ms. Flynn, and, I don't want anyone to feel that we're not considering that. And, that's a beautiful space that they created in her memory. And so we'll definitely make sure that she's, honored and remembered with that space. Thank you.
Great. Comments over here? Ms. Connolly?
If you read all the name suggestions, several of them came from me. So I'll try not to be biased in my suggestions. I think there's some really good ones in here. And We just need more parklets, I'm pretty sure, so we can use some of these names. I think a lot of these names, I feel like we need to have some kind of catalog or something to record all those, because they all really are pulling out different people, places, times in the history of the city, and it's important to have all that. So maybe our 250th anniversary committee could kind of get this list and keep it on the back of their minds, the Virginia 250 committee, if you would share some of those with Holly. As far as the names go, I think Cavalier Plaza, that just totally makes sense. I didn't even occur to me till I read that, but it's easy. It makes sense. Cavalier Park is already there. It cuts through. It's just a little tiny edge of it. So I would support Cavalier Park or Cavalier Plaza. It doesn't have to be Cavalier Trail even. We could have the Cavalier Trail and the Cavalier Plaza. And that just makes sense as far as placemaking. So I would agree with that one. And then the other one, I don't know. The Historical Commission suggested Foot. And I sat in that meeting, and one of the things that they were really interested, they were talking about Mr. Brown's park that's named after the Brown family. So this could be a Foot Park named after the whole Foot family, which was a very large family, owned a lot of land, including in that area as well as the Seven Corners area. So it wouldn't be named after an individual, it would be named after the Foot family. So I think that could be interesting. But I don't have really any strong opinions on that one. And as Mr. Shields says, it's hard to do that all from the dais.
Other opinions over here? Ms. Underhill?
Just a quick note. So I'm also generally in favor of not going towards specific names. But I did receive an email today of a resident asking about the history of the naming of Cavalier Trail. I don't know if that's information that we have in any sort of city record, but before we name more things, it would just be maybe good to know where this name came from in the first place.
That is an excellent question. I will look for that information and follow up and have it for our next meeting.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks a lot. So I've heard a discussion about we shouldn't name after individuals, and yet we immediately start discussing naming after individuals. Then we start talking about historic elements, and you immediately start to include one but exclude others. So here's one let's talk about names. I mean, Ike Eisenhower was the only American president that actually lived here, and he was the supreme commander. So if there was ever anyone you could name who actually lived here, he rises above all the others. But I understand that we don't want to do naming because that can get controversial. Then we start talking about, well, we're going to select different parts of history. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. My suggestion would be, particularly in the parklet in South Washington Street, that we name it Civic Service Park, that will allow us to bring in the history from the very earliest days to the present and allow people to understand the extent to which Falls Church is a small community, but our people have made history almost from the time, from the indigenous peoples on forward. And we use it as an opportunity to illustrate really what the population in this community has done, is doing, and will do in the future. So my suggestion would be something like Public Service Park or Civic Service Park or Citizens Park, something like that would allow us. I would even envision a QR code that would allow people to look at the full history of the city and understand that we're 2 square miles, but our contribution to history has been our people, the people that have lived here from the very earliest days to, frankly, today and into the future. Thanks.
Thank you. I think when the WNOD bridge, Mr. Day comes and speaks. He reminds us there was the Citizens Bridge, right? That's what it was officially or unofficially named. So we do.
No, it's officially named.
Oh, it's officially
There's a
named.
plaque on it, yeah.
Okay, it's called the Citizens Bridge, but Citizens S and an apostrophe, I think is what he said. Okay. Appreciate all the comments. And clearly there are a lot of deserving names, and this is probably one of the more lasting things we do up here. Hopefully this will endure long before all of us. So we definitely feel the weight of that. I think I generally agree with the majority of council where we want to give nods to both geography and history, but stay away from people names. I think I heard majority of people who felt that way. Cavalier Plaza might make sense, but probably need a little more discussion to figure out what makes sense for the other one, whether we go with triangle or some combination of things. But at least what I'm hearing now is that there was a majority of us who would like something that is not anchored in a person. So if that's helpful for kind of next steps, we'll give you the hard work to take it from here.
Yeah, I can absolutely narrow down the list and follow up on the history of that name, Cavalier Trail Park, too, for our next discussion.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Shields, on this one?
I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bazemore. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Are you ready to move on to business not on the agenda? Any committee reports? Do we have any committees upcoming? I think we're all enjoying that we can get up before 10. Councilmember comments?
I just want to say that Restaurant Week was awesome. Thank you so much to the EDA, the EDO, and Trisha Barba, who ran the social media, all the restaurants and the people who ate here in Falls Church. It was really good, and I'm really looking forward to the report on business in restaurants. My anecdotal visits to restaurants, everyone was saying how they're having more business than usual. They had the best day in months. So I hope that that really follows through to all 42 of those restaurants.
Ditto that.
Second,
Yep.
third, fourth.
Laura?
Thank you, Mayor. It might actually be interesting, Mayor, if you want to piggyback in a second about the small retail meeting that you had. Sure. I think that would be interesting. But I just wanted to say that it was a fantastic bread breaking at Whole Foods. And I felt a little guilty because there I was enjoying all this and I wasn't there for the hard work. And so I just wanted to put that out there that my fellow council members who were part of that, that was a lot of work, and I followed it as a school board member and as a citizen watching you all, and then other people, Phil Duncan, David Tarter. So watching you all do that, and you all really did the hard work and made sure that that deal went through. And so I felt a little bit guilty just basking in the glory of that thing opening up and having nothing to do with getting it there. But just my thanks to the leadership of this city. I think it's really going to, be a great addition to our community. It's going to help with our commercial, revenue coming in. And so just a shout out to everyone who made that happen. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Just to add on to that, I thought it was a really interesting fact that they had 110, 120 employees at their last location, and now they have 180 employees. So they really expanded, and just seeing all these people that were really excited to be working in Falls Church was like really, really exciting.
I think I said this during the approval, but we don't often talk about new jobs created enough as part of our fiscal analysis and economic development kind of analysis of new projects. But I think it's really apparent that a project like that brings new workers here, which is important. And livelihoods are created as a result. So kudos to everybody. On the note, though, so while we welcome big businesses like Whole Foods, small businesses are still very much the heart of Falls Church. I think the Browns Party is coming together. I want to say it's March 24th, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
March 28th.
28th, sorry, at Clarendon. So there's some great community members organizing kind of a farewell party and various tributes to Browns. And so that's a beloved business that we will all miss. And so that's nice community effort. On that note, as Laura said, I met with actually a handful of small businesses that really defy what we know about retail. They actually are located at the corner of Park and Lee at that 701 Point of View Eyewear building. They are all upper floor businesses and run amazingly successful retail. Don't need ground floor space, do all of their marketing through word of mouth and social media. I met with them, I visited them over the weekend and saw how successful they were. And so as the EDO and ED thinks about kind of the next evolution of how to better support their businesses, I would love for us to copy and paste what we did with Restaurant Week and think about, hopefully in the spring, potentially pairing it with health and fitness, along with the fitness challenge that we do every spring, or maybe summer, and then in the fall, doing a retail focus and really give more attention to other sectors of the business. We clearly love our restaurants and we benefit from sales and meals tax, but I think there's other sectors of our small business community that deserve some love from the city. So look forward to working with the EDO and EDA on that. Okay. Any other comments, things to note? With the snow on Wednesday, well, Tuesday night into Wednesday, how do we want to handle the mayor's meeting? Do we want to tackle schedule now?
We don't have a mayor's meeting since
Oh,
we don't have
Oh, never mind.
a meeting next week.
We're off anyway then. Great.
So
Okay.
good job.
I was going to bring it up so we could do it tonight, but
Neither rain nor.
Are we, I wasn't clear, were we gonna, I think we had maybe a placeholder for a meeting on Tuesday, but we're not meeting on Tuesday, is that right?
That's going to be in March. We're
Okay, so
where we
this
talked
coming
about
Tuesday,
having that,
we're, so nothing next week? Okay.
correct, yeah.
Great, thank you.
placeholder on Tuesday?
I will send out the council agenda schedule just so you can look at it and be, planning ahead. I'll send that out on Wednesday,
Okay, let's do that.
in case anybody misses it.
Great. Oh, and actually one more thing. I think as of earlier this afternoon, the Stratford team is planning on their demolition tomorrow morning around 9:30, snow or otherwise. So everyone, I think, might want to spectate.
Yeah, is there a safe viewing?
I think like Harris Teeter would be a great spot to view, don't you think?
I don't know if there's an official, here's where people are watching.
Not that I'm aware of, and I think it'll be kind of like what we saw on Park Avenue. It's going to be an excavator just sort of making its way through the building. So it's not going to be like a
There's no
implosion
ceremony.
or anything like
There's no wrecking ball that anyone gets to climb on or anything either. But I know that is that's a landmark in Falls Church. And
It
so
is, yeah.
seeing the transformation and adaptive reuse of that will be really cool too. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we are adjourned. Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you, council.